Bonjour tout le monde. On va commencer cette session qui est sur les programmes d'amélioration de la qualité de la prise en charge des usagers en périnatalité à travers diverses présentations avec des orateurs qui sont venus de loin. Comme moi-même, je suis oratrice, je suis très contente que Sophie Alexander de Bruxelles
Ça fait un quatrième pays.
Ça fait un quatrième pays et qui a accepté la proposition de co-modérer cette session. Et donc, on va commencer avec... en fait, la session va être en anglais pour les présentations des anglophones, avec les questions que vous pouvez poser en français. Et puis moi-même, j'ai des diapos en anglais, je ferai la présentation quand même en français. Donc je vais présenter notre première oratrice, Professor Elizabeth Draper, qui est professeure d'épidémiologie périnatale à l'université de Leicester, à Leicester au UK. Et elle va nous parler aujourd'hui de la mortalité périnatale au Royaume-Uni à partir du Embrace UK programme.
Thanks very much, Jennifer, and I'm very sorry that I'm going to speak in English, but I don't think you'd like my French, so there we go. I'll also try to not speak too fast. So I am the perinatal lead for Embrace UK. It's a large collaborative project, a national large collaborative project across the whole of the UK, all 4 countries, and is led by the University of Oxford. And University of Oxford lead the maternal mortality part of the project, and the University of Leicester lead the perinatal. So in this talk, I'm going to give you a little bit of background to Embrace UK, and then because I've been asked to talk about learning from confidential inquiries, I'm going to talk a bit about the inquiries that we've carried out, and then I'll just summarise with our ongoing programme. So Embrace UK stands for Mothers and Babies Reducing Risks Through Audit and Confidential Inquiries across the UK. And it's a programme of both perinatal surveillance and inquiries, confidential case reviews, to look at quality and safety of maternity and infant services, to support improvements in service quality through national learning, to produce some evidence-based recommendations and good practice points, and to influence clinical practice, service provision, health policy, and clinical education. And as I said earlier, there are maternal and perinatal programmes. And the perinatal programme comprises 2 main parts. We carry out surveillance of late fetal losses from 22 and 23 weeks, stillbirths and neonatal deaths from 20 weeks gestational age. And then we carry out confidential inquiries in a rolling programme of topics that are selected by anyone who works in the area of obs and gynae or neonatal medicine. We have an open call, actually most of the time, so people can put forward ideas for us, and then they're selected by our independent advisory group. So we've been running this programme of work since 2012, and our first report was in 2013. That was the first full year of data collection. We're always a little bit behind in the publication of our reports because we carry out a lot of validation activity, and therefore we are rather dependent on the Office of National Statistics for when they actually produce their denominator data to allow us to do both validation of the data and also to use their data when we want to do some adjustment for various risk factors. So what we produce from the whole programme is an annual report that provides information for all the different organisations that participate in perinatal care, so both the sort of commissioning areas and the hospitals and the various geographical areas. And then we also produce individual reports for individual hospitals, or trust and health boards as we call them, because some of them are in groups of hospitals, and that provides a more detailed analysis of their individual units' care and cases, and it allows them to actually go back and look to see why, if they are looking out of as a potential outlier, they've got a particularly high rate, to actually investigate their cases. And also we have a series of interactive online maps. These are publicly accessible, so if you go onto, if you just pop Embrace UK into the internet, you will find the website, and the website has access to all the reports, but it also has access to these maps. We've been producing these for the past 3-4 years. And you can see down the left-hand side, you can actually select what you want to look at. So you can select which year you want to look at, you can select which organisation type, and then various other things that you might like to select. And then across the top, underneath a bit where it says 155 organisations, you can either look at the stillbirth rate, the neonatal death rate, or extended perinatal rate. And you can look at crude rates, or the more stabilised and adjusted rates that we produce. We produce the rates in that way, stabilisation to allow for natural variation in hospitals, because some hospitals are very small and some hospitals are very big, and then adjusted for key risk factors, those risk factors that we've actually got the denominator data for, so things like ethnicity, birth weight, sex, maternal age, deprivation, those sorts of things. And then as well as that, you can focus in on your own particular area, and if you hover over one of the spots, depending on what type of unit you're looking at, so this is for trust and health boards, if you hover on a trust and health board, it will actually give you the information about what the mortality rates are with a 95% confidence interval, and how we've actually RAG rated them as to where they sit amongst their various comparators. And then we also have a real-time data monitoring tool that is only available for individual trusts to look at their own data. And this allows them to identify potential clusters of deaths, so they're alerted early to say, oh, looks like you're getting a bit of a cluster there. Would you like to go back and check why that's happened? And then as you look down the left-hand side, you can see there's a choice of various factors that you want to look at. It's like going on your shopping site, actually. You can just click on various ones. You can choose 4 different characteristics that you can put across the bottom in various graphs, and you can do comparisons of year on year and other issues like that. So this is to facilitate individual units actually looking more deeply into what's happening in their units with standardized data that's directly comparable to other units. So what has happened in the UK? And we're currently working under a government target that was initially identified in about 2015. And that the Health Secretary at the time, Jeremy Hunt, said that he wanted us to reduce stillbirth and neonatal mortality and maternal mortality by 20% by 2020, and initially it was by 50% by 2030. And then the next year, they decided we were so clever, we were going to be able to reduce these rates by 50% by 2025. I don't think anybody actually looked in the feasibility of that, but here we are. So we had our first full year of data in 2013, and we've used that as our benchmark. And you can see from this graph, from the top line, the extended perinatal death rate has reduced by 20% since 2013, that's up to 2020. Stillbirths have reduced by 21%, and neonatal deaths have reduced by 17%. And that means that if you actually applied the rate that was happening in 2013 and you applied it across the other years, across our programme, if you look at 2020, we have saved approximately 820 lives compared to what happened in 2013. And if you add all those up over those years, we think we've saved about 3,700 lives of babies. But I was asked really to focus on the learning from our enquiries. So I'm going to focus on enquiries that we've carried out as part of the programme. And these focus on the quality of care provision for individual cases of either stillbirth or neonatal death. And to date, we've run 5 separate enquiries since we started, and our first enquiry was looking into babies born with congenital diaphragmatic hernia. And then we went on to term singleton normally formed antepartum stillbirths, followed by term singleton intrapartum stillbirths and intrapartum related neonatal deaths. And subsequent to that, we looked at twin pregnancies, and we're currently running an inquiry that's looking into Black and minority ethnic group women, comparing Asian Black populations with the white population to see whether there's any difference in the level of care provision, the quality of care provision that's provided for those different women. But because I've only got half an hour, I'm going to focus on 2 of the enquiries, and I thought the largest ones where we're looking at particular issues that have a direct relation to you as obstetricians. So our first inquiry, so inquiries in general, what are they? So what we do is we assess the quality and safety of the services that are provided. We support our improvements in service quality through national learning, and we produce reports. We produce a full report about all the findings from the inquiry, but we also produce a lay summary report, which is targeted at the lay stakeholder population, so mothers and babies and families. And we also try to produce some sort of infographic that helps explain things in a very simple way. We try to produce evidence-based recommendations and good practice points and influence clinical practice, etc. And in these enquiries, we use the legal assumption that if it isn't written in the notes, it didn't happen, which sometimes causes a bit of argument. But, you know, if you've not written it in the notes, there is no evidence. So this is a brief summary of the method. We convene a topic expert group. So when we've selected what topic we want to look at, we ask people to put themselves forward with their CV to say why they might be interested in participating in our confidential inquiries and why they might want to help us develop the inquiry. We then review all the current guidance and standards for the development of the case evaluation, depending obviously upon the topic that we have selected. And we produce checklists which will allow us to collect standardized data for all the cases and allow us to do some benchmarking to assess compliance with current guidance for all the cases in a standardized way, and to collect any additional data that we need over and above the data that we've collected already in the perinatal surveillance system to facilitate our analysis. And the cases that we put through confidential inquiries are evaluated against the current guidance that we have. And we overall grade the care separately for mum and for baby. So in terms of the baby, that's whether there was good care with no improvements identified, improvements in care identified which would have made no difference to the outcome, or improvements in care identified which may have made a difference to the outcome. Obviously, we're always using the retrospectoscope. It's quite easy for you to assess somebody's quality of care in the full knowledge of what happened. So we need to take that into account when we're actually looking and discussing these cases in these multidisciplinary groups. In terms of the mother and the care provided for the mother, what we're looking at is in terms of her health and her mental health, her physical health and her well-being and her future pregnancies. So we're looking at everything from what happened postnatally, whether the care was reviewed well, that she had, and whether she had appropriate tests following the delivery of her baby that died, and also whether there was adequate discussion of her future fertility, and adequate testing and discussion and letters and meeting with consultants to discuss what happened. So we then select a sample, depending on what the topic is that's been selected. We request notes, and they are then fully anonymised. We hold multidisciplinary panels, and we follow a very standardized methodology, which is highlighted in a paper that I published quite a lot of years ago now. And then we analyse the data, and we hold a writing group with members of our TEG and any interested panel members to help us write the individual chapters along the care pathway for the type of death that we are looking at. So the first example is looking at the term singleton normally formed antepartum stillbirths. So in the UK, currently about 1 in 200 total births end in stillbirth, and we know that 1 in 3 of these stillbirths occur at term. So that obviously is the point at which the baby has the greatest chance of survival. So we thought that this was quite an important group to look at. So we selected a random sample from our 2013 data. There were in total 1,038, and we selected 133 initially for the inquiry. And then we actually put 85 through the inquiry because following discussions we'd actually led to saturation of themes, and therefore we stopped at the point of 85. But we collect all this extra data on these checklists, and we have this random sample, and we hope that these full confidential inquiries with this additional data will be rich in depth following our case note reviews, and we hope that because we've used a random sample, we'll have a potentially statistically significant generalizable sample, even though it's quite small. So each time we run an inquiry, we check that it is representative of the group that we're interested in, and so far we've managed to do that. So what were the findings from these 85 cases that went through panels? And I've focused on a few of them. So from an antenatal care point of view, panels found that half of the term stillbirths had critical gaps in care. And this meant that women who were managed as low risk, sometimes they were managed as low risk, but actually they weren't low risk. And we identified 3 critical areas where there were gaps in the antenatal care identified. So the first one was in measuring the growth of the baby. In 2/3 of cases we reviewed, guidance for screening and monitoring the growth of the baby wasn't followed. And this meant that there were missed opportunities for actually measuring the mum's abdomen and checking whether her baby was growing appropriately. And then in some cases that occurred, but the measurements weren't plotted on the graph. And if you measure and then you don't plot it, it's not very helpful. And then even if those things happened, there were some women who weren't referred for closer monitoring, even when the baby's growth didn't follow a normal pattern. So that was the first area. Another area was about babies' movements. So almost half of the mothers had contacted maternity units concerned that their baby's movements had slowed, changed or stopped. And in half of these, we found missed opportunities to potentially save the baby. So these missed opportunities were not investigating when a mum presents with concerns about her baby's movements, misinterpretation of the fetal trace, and not responding appropriately to any additional risk factors that the mother might have, including women returning again more than once with further concerns about her baby's movements. The third main area from an antenatal point of view was for diabetic mothers, or testing for diabetes. So around half of the women who had at least one risk factor for developing gestational diabetes, these were mainly women who were obese or from a high-risk ethnic minority group. 2 out of 3 of these women were not offered testing. And obviously these were missed opportunities for actually identifying whether a mum was developing diabetes in pregnancy. GTTs weren't offered in cases while they identified risk factors, and therefore we missed opportunities for closer monitoring of these mothers. And then further along the care pathway, following the antepartum stillbirth, we were looking at case reviews, and we showed that there were some missed opportunities for learning lessons from local case reviews, in that for 3/4 of stillbirths, a review wasn't even undertaken, and this was in 2013. And where a review was conducted, very few followed national guidance or involved any parental views as to what had happened to them. And obviously the people that are more directly affected by what happens to their baby is the mother and the father. And if you don't include any of their views in your review, then that's a bit of a missing piece of information. And this led to a recommendation that all units should conduct a multidisciplinary review for all term stillbirths, following the standards recommended by the Department of Health and the Stillbirth and Neonatal Death Society Task and Finish Group. And this was at a time where we were just developing our perinatal mortality review tool, which is now in place across the whole of England, and it's spreading across the rest of the UK. And it's part of a measure that the Department of Health and the NHS use to see whether they're actually meeting their targets, and if they don't carry out these cases reviews for all their cases or within a certain time period, then they can be penalised and money can be taken off the unit. So we've actually got that international programmes. Looking at pathological examination, we found that most of the postmortems and placental histology were good, and that the findings from those could contribute significantly to the care of the next pregnancy. We also recommended that if PM is declined, we should ensure that placental histology is undertaken. And in the UK, you can undertake placental histology without individual consent. It's an expectation that that happens. And one of the other findings, and this has come through on a number of inquiries, was ensuring that we have an accurate clinico-pathological interpretation of the results. And that is dependent both upon the pathologist, but also upon the clinical staff that send in the details of the clinical case into the pathology lab. And actually, those have been found to be fairly poor. The other thing is trying to issue results from postmortems in a timely fashion. And we have a crisis in the UK with perinatal pathologists. I don't know whether that's the same in France, but we have very few. And so actually trying to keep to that is quite difficult. We also identified the fact that if there was any doubt or controversy about particular findings, we should actually highlight those and then trying to go back and investigate those a bit further, because else that can lead to parents being confused about what actually happened and what interpretation has been made about what happened to their baby. So that was the antepartum stillbirth learning. And then moving on to the intrapartum stillbirths and intrapartum related neonatal mortality. And we did this because they had carried out in our programme of activity, which started in the UK in the early 90s, we were starting to carry out perinatal surveillance and some confidential inquiries. And in 1993, they actually carried out a confidential inquiry into intrapartum related deaths of 2.5 kilos or more. And then in the next couple of years, they expanded it down to 1.5 kilos and all neonatal deaths. And they found suboptimal antenatal care for almost half of the cases they reviewed and suboptimal intrapartum care for 3/4 of the cases that they reviewed. And just by saying that, that sounds a really high proportion, but if you think about it, we look at the cases at confidential inquiries going along the whole of the care pathway. So you've got the whole of the 9-month, or well, obviously not right from the beginning, unless you're infertility treatment, but maybe from, month 3 onwards, and you're looking at every single thing that occurred to the mother, both up to the delivery and death of the baby and following it for review purposes. So it is a long period of time to look at. So for our next confidential inquiry, and these were deaths in 2015, we looked at a random sample of all term singleton intrapartum deaths, stratified by UK country to make sure that we were getting cases from all of the 4 UK countries, and in total there were 225. And again, using the same sort of methodology, we actually compared, we carried out 78 full inquiries and collected data for the other 147 non-selected deaths, and we looked to see whether it was a representative sample and found no significant differences in any of the particular risk factors that we've identified there. So what did we find? So to put this into context, we wanted to look to see what had happened over those 20 years since the last inquiry that was looking at this group. So over that period of time, the actual rate of intrapartum death had reduced from 0.62 to 0.28 per thousand total births, a reduction of about 220 intrapartum deaths per year. So many fewer cases. But also, what had happened to women over that period of time? You know, their risk factors and the conditions and the complexity of the care package that they required. Well, over that period, we showed a huge increase in maternal age. The largest percentage of births in the 70s were to 25 to 29-year-olds, and into the 2000s to 30 to 34-year-olds. So pregnant women are getting older, and the average age of primates was 30.2 years in 2014. And more than 20% of mothers were aged 35 years or more in 2014. 10% of mothers were obese during pregnancy in 1990, compared to an almost doubling of 19% in the early 2000s. And the actual population of mothers born outside the UK, 11.6% in 1990, compared to almost 30% in 2014. So we're talking about a hugely changing population of women. And in addition to that, in 1993, 94, 95, the amount of standards and guidance that were actually out there was fairly minimal. And you know yourselves that guidance and such like standards have increased hugely. They've sort of mushroomed over time. So guidance from RCOG, NICE, the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, Resuscitation Council, British Association of Perinatal Medicine, Stillbirth and Neonatal Death Society, and the Royal College of Pathologists, and I'm sure for you in France it's very similar. But, you know, we had, when we did the first enquiries in the early 90s, it was sort of a short list like this, and in our inquiry here in 2015, there were about 3 pages of what the guidance was, and actually making sure that people stuck to that. Obviously, you know, it's much more complicated to stick to 40 different bits of guidance and standards compared to half a dozen. So, when babies die as term as a result of something that happened during labour, we know that 1 in 20 stillbirths and deaths of babies within 4 weeks of birth is labour related. So it's a fairly small part of deaths overall. And when we looked at the overall results from the confidential inquiries, in 80%, that's 4 in every 5 cases, different care might have prevented the baby's death, which was quite astonishing and quite worrying. And 1 in 4 deaths, we showed there were problems with adequate staffing and resource. And I'm sure over time that's getting more and more. I know we've got major problems in the UK. I don't know whether the problems are the same for you in France, but as you're probably aware, we're having many, many strikes in the UK at the moment, including midwives, which is rare. And one of the reasons that they're striking is because they feel that the service isn't safe because there aren't enough staff. So what needs to be done to prevent future labour-related deaths? And here I've provided from the slide, this is part of one of our lay reports where we present the data in a way that we hope people can understand it. So we showed that in at least a quarter of the deaths, there were problems with adequate staffing and resources. And then we produce in the turquoise on the right-hand side what our recommendation is. And obviously that's to improve staffing and resources. Another issue we found was that not all women with previous caesarean sections had clear discussions about their birth plans. Now, in the UK, every mother, when they book for antenatal care, starts to produce a birth plan with their midwife, and then it's agreed by all the multidisciplinary team who are working with her. And people try to stick to that birth plan unless, obviously, something out of the ordinary happens. And we suggest that women with previous caesarean sections should have clear discussions about their birth plan so they can make informed decisions. We also found that there were problems recognising when mothers moved from early to established labour, and we don't have a definition of that early bit before, and you obviously don't have one here either. And so one of our suggestions here, or one of our recommendations, was that we should try and start to develop some national guidance around how we should manage that early stage of labour. And then again, monitoring the baby's heart rate, as we found in the antepartum stillbirth inquiry, we found that guidelines weren't followed when monitoring the baby's heart rate, and this time during labour, which led to delays when babies needed to be delivered urgently. And that led to a recommendation of improvements in training for fetal monitoring and situational awareness for all staff. We found 1 in 3 neonatal deaths had no post-mortem examination or placental histology. And one of the things we're really pushing in the UK is that we get placental histology for all babies that die on labour, all stillbirths, all babies that die within the first day of life, and any baby that seems to have undergone any compromise during the labour process. And we suggest that all families must be offered consent for post-mortem with written material to support their decision-making. And we found 9 out of 10 reviews of care didn't follow national guidance for serious incidents. And we suggest that units should adopt our national perinatal mortality review tool, which we then suggested it at that point, but now they have to, they don't get any choice. And that what they actually do is put aside some time for training their staff so they actually know how to carry out the perinatal mortality review tool in a robust and standardised way. We've tried to produce all sorts of tools and training and such like that makes it obvious how this should be carried out, but we need to keep going back to units to make sure that it is being carried out in that way. And I'm not going to go through these 2 slides, but this was just to highlight in our lay reports, we actually produce messages for our pregnant women in a way to say, we're trying to empower you. If, for example, you haven't been offered a carbon monoxide testing on your first antenatal visit, you should be able to ask for it. You should know that that is an expectation of what should be happening. And so there's a list of things we've said to mothers, this is what you should expect. And we've also produced messages for anybody who supports a mother and a family whose baby's died, so saying that all parents should be offered a post-mortem, that we should use specialist pathologists, and what sort of ongoing care and review should be expected. So a recommendation from here was that the National Quality Improvement in Training Programme should be implemented to improve compliance with national guidance in the use of intermittent auscultation during the first and second stage of labour, and real-time ultrasound should there be difficulty in detecting the fetal heart during labour. So that's a brief synopsis, and if you want to see those in any great detail, you can go to our Embrace website, you can download all the reports, you can download slide sets, you can go onto our interactive system. So please feel free to look at that. We're currently completing our confidential inquiry into Black and Asian women, comparing them to the white population, and we are currently finalising a policy for identifying units where we've suggested that their perinatal mortality rate is of concern, or their stillbirth rate is of concern, or their neonatal mortality rate is of concern. And so notifying higher up people within their specialty so that they actually carry out some sort of review and investigate why that is. We are on our interactive maps and tables at the moment. When you just hover on there, that just shows you the current year you're looking at. We're developing a system so you can actually look at what's happened over the past few years, so you can look at trends to see whether your rates are going up or down. And on our real-time data monitoring tool, we're going to add some statistical process control and other statistical parts for those people who are more interested in a more detailed statistical review of what's happening. So, thank you very much, and I acknowledge all these people. And I apologize for overrunning.
Bon, Elisabeth, merci beaucoup pour un papier passionnant. très dense, donc sans doute il y aura des questions. Moi, j'ai une question de belge au français. Est-ce que vous faites... Je sais que, notamment grâce à l'énergie de Catherine Deneuve et d'Épopée, de gens comme ça, il y a maintenant une enquête sur la mortalité maternelle. Vous avez une enquête en routine sur la mortalité périnatale? Nous non plus, hein, pas de... Les Hollandais, do you have a routine perinatal mortality auditing system? Yes. OK. Bon, alors, est-ce qu'il faudrait commencer?
It's nationally funded. It's a programme that's funded from the NHS via a organisation called the Healthcare Quality Improvement Programme, and they run a programme of national clinical audits and national clinical outcome review programmes, and we happen to be one of those. Well, that's a very interesting question, because this programme has been running in one shape or form since, as I said, the early 90s. And when we took it over in 2012, the funding was cut by half and they expected us to do more. So what we actually get for the whole programme of perinatal and maternal inquiry and surveillance is around £750,000 per annum for 4 major aspects of work. And I can tell you it isn't enough money, because all the senior academics who are involved, like myself and Jennifer Korinchuk, who's the director of the National Perinatal Epidemiology Unit, and Marion Knight, who works there, and other people who are investigators, because there's a huge collaboration there, we all basically provide our time for free. It is depressing, and we have suggested that, you know, they ought to up the money, but it's unlikely to be happening at the moment, isn't it?
I'm correct in believing that at one time there was a call, and you at the NPU, you got it. Donc en fait, ça a été soumissionné et n'importe qui pouvait essayer de l'avoir. Et c'est vous qui l'avez eu. Ce qui est logique aussi, à partir du moment où l'État sait ce qu'il veut, il peut très bien...
Yeah, so we get funding for 3 years, and then if they think we've done an okay job, we can apply for the next 2 without doing a full application. But after 5 years, we have to bid for it again. So every 5 years, you have to do a full bid, which I have to say is a bit of a pain. And then we have to fight with our organisations because our universities don't think there's enough money.
Bien compris, ce programme d'amélioration, c'est obligatoire pour toutes les maternités. C'est ça que j'ai compris. Hein. C'est-à-dire qu'il s'impose à tout le monde. Donc, il y a, outre le site qui un peu montre à chacun où est sa maternité, chaque maternité, chaque équipe de suivre les recommandations et ça.
Oh, no. Everybody has to participate. There's no choice. And, yeah.
Moi, ça me paraît bizarre. On a le même problème en Belgique, hein, mais d'être subventionné avec de l'argent public et de refuser de participer à un audit.
No. And we validate all the data from the perinatal surveillance point of view. We validate the data as we go along. We write back to the units and we say, you haven't sent us all your cases if they haven't sent all the cases. And we make sure that it all balances up and that we've actually identified all of them. But with this new system, or the newer system that's been in place for about 3 or 4 years, where they get a penalty if they haven't notified the cases to us within a certain period of time, then they do have a bit of a push to tell us about all
They
their
get a
cases.
financial penalty.
A financial
Donc en
penalty
plus,
to the
les
unit.
hôpitaux qui rentrent
Yeah.
leur cas avec du retard sont pénalisés financièrement.
Yeah.
J'avais juste une petite question, si vous permettez. On est quand même tenu de faire des revues de mortalité, notamment en périnatalité, en France, avec très peu de moyens, puisque généralement c'est fait au sein même des maternités, avec éventuellement un ingénieur qualité qui nous donne un coup de main, mais c'est sûr qu'on n'a effectivement pas beaucoup d'incitation à les faire, et si on oublie de les faire, ben, ça passe à l'as, et je ne suis pas persuadée que ce soit fait de manière régulière, obligatoire, comme c'est fait dans tous les hôpitaux. Et c'est bien dommage d'ailleurs.
Yeah.
Oui, Catherine Cranebert, je suis gynécologue obstétricienne et yes, I am obstetrician and medical referent for perinatality in Regional Health Authority in Paris region. And Paris region is supposed to have quite enough resource compared to other regions of France. And we are facing a very important problem for pathologists. When I see that your recommendation is to encourage to have placental examination at least, we are facing a huge problem to get that for every perinatal death.
Absolutely, and we have the same problem. I've just been part of a group trying to work through how we're going to deal with the inadequate number of people that are around to carry out perinatal pathology. And we have put together a system where people have to actually share their resource a bit more widely than has been done in the past, and we've actually identified the very key things that pathologists should be doing and suggesting other areas where that's perhaps not so necessary. So the most important bits, yeah.
And to my knowledge, in Belgium, we also have restrictions on, we aren't allowed to move around a dead baby. So it means you can't take the baby to the perinatal pathologist, but you have to...
No, we don't have that problem. We can move the baby.
You can move
Yeah,
the baby.
yeah.
But I think in France, it's like in Belgium.
Yeah.
Et Jennifer, tout le monde connaît Jennifer. Hein. Elle travaille à Épopée, elle fait tourner Péristat.
Moi, je vais parler de l'apport des comparaisons européennes. Alors, on a pris un peu de retard. Je vais essayer d'aller un peu plus court. Enfin, je vais peut-être sauter ou aller vite sur certains points pour laisser suffisamment de temps pour notre oratrice, la troisième personne. Je vais voir si je peux faire ça en temps réel. Moi, je suis épidémiologiste périnatale, je travaille à l'Épopée à l'INSERM et je travaille sur l'organisation de soins et la qualité des soins pour des mères et des bébés, sur les cohortes d'enfants très prémas et également sur l'utilisation des données de routine pour l'évaluation, la surveillance, la santé périnatale. Et c'est sur ces projets-là que je vais vous présenter aujourd'hui. Je vais d'abord rapidement parler de comment les comparaisons entre pays peuvent contribuer à améliorer les soins. Puis je vais vous présenter le projet Europeristat dont je vais utiliser des données pour la présentation, et puis quelques données récentes de notre dernier rapport Europeristat sur la mortalité périnatale et aussi sur le mode d'accouchement. Donc la recherche comparative, comparée entre les pays, les deux raison principale, c'est d'abord de voir que ça peut être mieux ailleurs. En fait, c'est possible de faire mieux. Et deuxièmement, ça peut donner des idées qu'on n'a pas, quand on est dans notre monde et on a une façon de faire. Parfois, on ne réfléchit pas à d'autres modèles ou d'autres façons de fonctionner. Donc, les comparaisons européennes, en fait, ça fournit des comparaisons pour voir comment on fait par rapport aux autres. Ça permet aussi de poser des questions à une échelle plus grande. Je reviendrai sur cette question à la fin. Puis, ça permet de générer des hypothèses pour les recherches. L'Europe, pour ça, c'est très utile comme contexte, parce que dans les pays européens, on a des pays qui ont un accès similaire aux connaissances médicales, et puis une bonne couverture en assurance santé. Mais au sein de l'Europe, il y a beaucoup de variabilité dans l'organisation et les pratiques de soins obstétricaux et néonataux. Et donc c'est vraiment un contexte intéressant pour ces comparaisons. Pour comparer, on a besoin des données sur le pays. Et donc, il n'y a pas beaucoup de sources pour ça. Il faut prendre des données qui sont produites de la statistique routine. Et c'est compliqué parce que ces données ne sont souvent pas disponibles, ou s'ils sont disponibles, sont difficiles à comprendre, ne sont pas comparables. Et le projet Europeristat, et Sophie Alexander a été avec nous au tout début de ce projet, déjà il y a 20 ans, 23 ans, avec pour but de surveiller la santé périnatale en Europe à partir des données en routine. Et on avait une définition assez large de notre sujet. Et puis, on voulait faire un protocole commun qui nous permettait de exploiter tout ce qui existait au niveau des données en routine, avec comme source l'état civil, les registres de naissance ou des données hospitalières. Et actuellement, on a des représentants de 31 pays européens qui participent au réseau Europeristat. Tout au début, on avait fixé un certain nombre d'indicateurs, des indicateurs principaux et des indicateurs recommandés en 4 catégories. Et l'idée était d'avoir des indicateurs importants, mais aussi faisables, parce que ce n'est pas la peine de recommander quelque chose qu'on ne va jamais pouvoir vraiment collecter. Et donc, en 4 catégories, sur le bébé, la mère, les caractéristiques de la population et les services de soins. On a fait plusieurs rapports. Déjà, on a testé nos indicateurs sur des données de 2000, puis on a fait des rapports sur des données de 2004, 2010, 2015. Et juste récemment, on a fait un rapport sur la période 2015-2019. Alors, je vais vous parler un tout petit peu de ce dernier rapport et aussi nos procédures. Là, c'est un tableau et les gens derrière ne vont pas bien voir. Mais ce qu'on fait, en fait, ce qu'on a fait au début, on faisait des tableaux Excel. On demandait aux gens de nous fournir des données dont on avait besoin de créer des indicateurs. Ça, c'est pour la mortinatalité, par exemple, avec des catégories par âge gestationnel, par multiplicité, par poids de naissance, qui nous permettaient par la suite de construire des indicateurs communs, c'est-à-dire d'imposer les mêmes seuils par exemple pour la mortinatalité, de regarder tous les morts à partir de 24 ou 28 semaines et de faire des analyses un peu plus poussées au lieu d'avoir juste un taux qui est sur un site quelque part. Donc, pour prendre nos 10 indicateurs principaux, à cause de cette approche, il y avait 50 tableaux à remplir pour avoir suffisamment d'informations, pour avoir vraiment des indicateurs comparables. Alors, pour ce qu'on a essayé de faire cette fois-ci, c'est dans un cadre d'un projet sur la mise en commun des données en population pour comprendre la pandémie Covid, on a mis en place un autre système où chaque institut qui collecte des données crée un base de données exactement avec le même format. On définissait le format, puis on faisait tourner des programmes et qui produisaient ces tableaux, produisaient les mêmes informations qui sont dans les tableaux Excel très rapidement. Et ça nous a permis en fait de collecter des données sur plusieurs années, parce que notre façon de faire avant, avec 50 tableaux, c'était difficile de demander aux gens de nous donner 2015, 2016, 2016, parce que ça faisait beaucoup de tableaux à remplir. Donc, c'est très bien parce que ça me permet d'harmoniser un peu plus les données. Tout le monde utilise le même format. On se rend compte quand les gens n'ont pas compris parce que les programmes ne tournent pas. Et puis, une fois que c'est mis en place, ça tourne rapidement. Ça a été un peu compliqué de mettre en place. Et un des grands désavantages de ce modèle, c'est qu'il faut avoir toutes les données de la même source. Parce qu'on fait tourner les programmes sur une source de données. Je reviendrai là-dessus. Donc, puisque c'était un protocole pilote, on a collecté des données juste sur 9 de nos 10 indicateurs. Les 28 pays qui ont participé, là, avec les données de 2015 à 2020, là, je présenterai des données jusqu'à 2019, parce que Covid, pour les tendances dans le temps, c'est un peu compliqué. Pour 2020, on a eu 27 millions de naissances qu'on additionne toutes les données qui nous a été données. Pour la France, on a utilisé comme source les données hospitalières, des données du PMSI ou de SNDS, parce que c'est les seules données en France actuellement qui permettent d'avoir des informations en population sur beaucoup de nos indicateurs, comme la prématurité, le poids de naissance, l'âge des mères. Enfin, il y a des données aussi à l'INSEE, mais c'est celui qui est le plus fiable pour certaines données médicales. Donc, en ce qui concerne la mortinatalité et la mortalité néonatale, je vais peut-être aller vite sur cette partie, juste pour dire que, en fait, c'est compliqué de mesurer la mortinatalité à travers les pays de l'Europe. Là, ce que je vous montre là, c'est un graphique sur les données de 2004. Et en fait, ça divise la mortalité néonatale par rapport à l'âge gestationnel. Et les derniers bouts, c'est les taux de mortalité pour les décès à 22-23 semaines. Et après, c'est 24-27. Et à 22-23, vous allez voir qu'il y a une très, très grande variabilité, beaucoup plus que ce qu'on peut comprendre, pourrait exister entre les pays, et y compris, par exemple, vous allez voir en Suède, malheureusement, je ne sais pas si j'ai quelque chose pour pointer, mais en Suède, par exemple, en 2004, ils n'enregistraient même pas les morts-nés en dessous de 28 semaines. Donc, c'est vide. Donc, il faut vraiment comprendre un peu comment on fait l'enregistrement de ces décès. Sur les données de 2015, on a fait à nouveau cette analyse et on a conclu, après ces analyses, qu'en Europe, actuellement, on peut bien comparer les morts-nés à partir de 24 semaines, mais à 22-23 semaines, il y a trop de variabilité sur les méthodes d'enregistrement pour permettre ça. Donc, c'est ça que je vais vous montrer ici. J'ai aussi des données pour les morts 28 et plus, ce qui est la définition qui est proposée par l'OMS pour des comparaisons internationales. Mais en Europe, on a des systèmes de statistiques en routine qui permettent de faire à partir de 24. Donc là, c'est la France. Je suis désolée encore pour les gens derrière parce que je ne suis pas sûre que vous pouvez voir. Tout ça, c'est dans notre rapport. Mais donc, il y a un médian à 3,2 pour la mortinatalité pour 1000 naissances totales. Et la France est à 3,4, donc un peu au-dessus. Ça, c'est la France. Et ce qu'on voit, c'est que c'est assez stable au cours du temps. Je mets aussi le UK, qui a un taux très, très proche de la France. Mais on voit, comme les a dit dans son appel, dans sa présentation, que c'est plutôt en baisse. Puis un autre pays, c'est juste au-dessus, c'est l'Allemagne, qui a un taux assez proche aussi, mais qui a une tendance en hausse. Et ça, c'est juste pour dire qu'au sein de l'Europe, il y a des situations assez contrastées en termes de tendance et aussi en termes de taux, comme vous pouvez voir, entre la Finlande et, par exemple, la Belgique. Je vais revenir là. Donc ça, c'est le changement, mais je vais juste aller ici. Cependant, le contexte français est différent que l'Europe, parce que là, ce que je vous ai montré, c'est les morts-nés, ce qu'on dirait en France, spontanés. C'est-à-dire, on enlève des IMG, les interruptions médicales de grossesse, de nos statistiques. Alors, pourquoi on fait ça ? Alors là, je vais vous montrer deux sources de données. Un, c'est les sources Eurostat. C'est ce que vous allez voir si vous allez sur les statistiques de routine européenne pour regarder le taux de mortinatalité. Ils prennent tous les morts-nés. En France, la moitié des morts-nés sont des IMG, parce que la France a une pratique de permettre la pratique des IMG après 22 semaines ou après 24 semaines, ce qui est très rare dans les autres pays européens. Et donc, ça relève beaucoup plus d'une politique de dépistage d'anomalies congénitales que dans les autres pays. Ces IMG existent, bien sûr, mais sont faites avant 22 semaines de manière presque universelle. Donc, vous voyez le rouge là, la France est le troisième pays de la gauche, et on voit la partie de la mortinatalité qui est des IMG. Et on voit qu'il y a certains autres pays qui ont de rouge, mais la plupart des pays, ils n'ont pas les IMG, très très peu, après 22 semaines. Après, vraiment, vraiment très peu, après 24. Ce que je voudrais juste dire, c'est la Belgique, par exemple, ils font des IMG, mais ils ne peuvent pas les distinguer des morts-nés, entre guillemets, spontanés. Donc, une des raisons que la Belgique a un taux de morts-nés élevé, c'est parce que les IMG sont dedans. Cependant, en France, les IMG ne sont pas faites uniquement pour des anomalies congénitales. Et c'est là où, probablement, le taux de morts-nés en France est un peu sous-estimé quand on enlève des IMG. Ça, c'est une analyse qu'on a faite à partir des données d'épipage sur des naissances entre 22 et 31 semaines d'aménorrhée. Et ce qu'on a vu, c'est que 15% des IMG qui sont faites pendant cette période-là sont pour d'autres raisons, pour des complications obstétricales ou maternelles. Et donc, du coup, dans d'autres pays, ces cas-là ne seront pas classés dans les IMG, ces cas-là seront classés soit dans les morts néonatales, soit dans les morts nés. Donc, ce que je vous ai montré sur la France, probablement, ça sous-estime le vrai taux de mortalité en France. Ça, c'est la mortalité néonatale. Alors, vous n'allez pas voir la France sur cette diapo parce qu'en France, les morts néonatales sont comptabilisées par l'INSEE, or que la mortinatalité vient des données hospitalières. Et ça, c'est vraiment dommage parce que ce n'est pas possible de les confronter. Et probablement, il y a des doubles comptages aussi. On a vu que ça arrive, donc certains qui sont dans les deux bases de données. Mais si on met la France ici, la France a un taux de mortalité néonatale de 2,5 à peu près, 2,6 en 2019, qui est au-delà de la médiane, à 22 semaines. Vous allez voir cette ligne-là. Et la France est plus à droite que beaucoup d'autres pays. Alors, je vais passer rapidement au mode d'accouchement. Donc, la France, par contre, a un taux de césarienne qui est tout à fait proche de la médiane, avec 20, en dessous, pardon, de la médiane, plus proche du premier quartile, à 20,09. Et là aussi, sur cette graphique, vous allez voir le taux d'extraction instrumentale qui est à 12,3 et qui est quand même assez élevé par rapport aux autres pays. Il y a une variabilité, la médiane est de 6 et donc plutôt vers le haut avec un haut à 13,8. France est un peu dans la moyenne pour les changements annuels, mais je vais vite pour pouvoir laisser peu de parole à notre troisième oratrice. Donc je vais juste dire, en fait, et je vais même passer sur ce point-là. Je vais juste venir ici. Une autre chose, quand je vais parler des big picture, c'est-à-dire qu'on pourrait regarder les questions un peu à notre échelle, et je vais juste vous donner deux exemples de ces questions qu'on pourrait poser, mais sans rentrer dans les détails. L'un, c'est la question qu'on vient de voir sur les extractions instrumentales et césariennes. On pourrait imaginer dans le pays où le taux de césarienne est plus bas, on fera plus d'extractions instrumentales Et là, sur le plan individuel, c'est certainement vrai que c'est quelque chose qui peut permettre à éviter une césarienne, mais sur le plan écologique, quand on regarde en Europe, il n'y a pas d'association entre le taux d'extraction instrumentale et le taux de césarienne. Donc, ça veut dire qu'il y a d'autres facteurs qui agissent sur les taux de césarienne et également probablement sur le taux d'extraction instrumentale. Une autre question que je mets ici, c'est que, bon, on a vu que est-ce que le fait d'avoir un taux de césarienne plus élevé, ça nous permet aussi d'éviter des morts néonatales et des morts nées. Et là, c'est des graphiques en bleu, c'est toutes les naissances, et en violet, c'est toutes les naissances, et en bleu clair, c'est les singletons. C'est pour dire, est-ce qu'il y a une association entre le taux de césarienne et la mortalité néonatale? Et en fait, finalement, il n'y en a pas. C'est-à-dire, des pays en Europe avec des taux de césarienne, il y a un écart très, très important entre à peu près 16% et 50%, et ça n'a pas d'effet sur leur taux de mortalité néonatale. Et la même chose, on voit sur la mortinatalité. Donc, les pays avec le même taux de césarienne ont vraiment une grande variabilité dans les taux de mort-née. Donc, en résumé, enfin, c'est des comparaisons internationales comme ça, déjà, les gens aiment bien voir. Ça permet de regarder les données un peu différemment, parce qu'on veut que son système soit le meilleur, je pense souvent. Mais ça permet de voir où on peut s'améliorer. Il y a toujours une possibilité. Il n'y a jamais un pays qui est bon sur tous les indicateurs. C'est ça qui est vraiment bien. Peut-être la Finlande, mais c'est rare. Et ça permet d'avoir plein d'idées, poser des bonnes questions. Pourquoi on peut faire ça dans ce contexte? Qu'est-ce qui fait que ça évolue comme ça? Pourquoi en Allemagne, la mortinatalité augmente? Au UK, ça baisse. En France, ça stagne. Enfin, qu'est-ce qu'on peut apprendre des expériences de différents pays? Et en fait, le vrai challenge, c'est de comprendre pourquoi il y a ces différences. Et ça nécessite ce type d'études, mais également d'autres approches, y compris des approches qualitatives. Et là, je vais passer sur ce dernier diapositive, de dire que c'est vraiment très utile et on est trop content de notre collecte de données parce qu'on a maintenant un protocole qu'on pourrait mettre en place pour avoir des données tous les ans. Donc là, il y a tous les gens qui participent, on est beaucoup, et ça, c'est le site web et vous pouvez aller voir qui participe des différents pays. Donc, merci.
Merci beaucoup, Jennifer. Est-ce qu'il y a des questions?
En revenir au topo de Madame précédente, c'est comment est-ce qu'on fait pour passer de cette collecte de données justement à des mesures qui soient plus incitatives, comme en Angleterre? Comment est-ce qu'on peut passer justement de cette collecte de données avec éventuellement des indicateurs, hein, comme on l'a fait, je pense notamment à une question qui m'a toujours turlupiné, c'est pourquoi moins d'hémorragie de la délivrance en Angleterre qu'en France. J'ai jamais compris pourquoi, j'aimerais bien comprendre avant la fin de ma carrière. C'est comment est-ce qu'on peut faire pour qu'on puisse avoir une vision nationale qui soit plus incitative vers la qualité à partir de ces données. En France, hein, spécifiquement.
Alors moi, je crois que tu peux déjà raconter ce qui s'est passé aux Pays-Bas, parce que c'est assez passionnant pour dire que parfois, il y a eu des retentissements directs des résultats d'Européristat.
Ces données nous aident beaucoup à discuter de la nécessité de mettre en place des systèmes d'audit, par exemple. C'est en cours. Enfin, ça gêne qu'on voit que la France ne fait pas aussi bien que les autres, les voisins à côté. Donc, c'est une incitation puissante pour les pouvoirs publics, pour avoir un peu d'attention. Donc, nous, on travaille dessus. Je pense qu'on va avancer. Moi, je vais vous dire mon fond. Ce que je pense, c'est que la France fait très bien sur les césariennes parce qu'il y a les enquêtes nationales périnatales. Énormément de travaux en France sur les césariennes. Vraiment, c'est suivi, on sait quels sont les facteurs, on est vraiment dedans. Sur les morts néonatales, on n'a rien. Donc, ce n'est pas étonnant qu'on n'agit pas sur cette variable. On ne sait pas. On sait que la mortalité est élevée, mais on ne sait pas. Donc, une première, moi je suis épidémiologiste, donc évidemment je trouve que le problème c'est l'absence de données, mais je pense que c'est un vrai facteur. Et les gens ont besoin d'informations, ils ont besoin de données pour agir, pour savoir où, est-ce que c'est des inégalités, est-ce que la prise en charge des grands prémas, est-ce que c'est le changement dans l'IMC des femmes, qu'est-ce qui fait qu'on est dans cette situation? Sans savoir, c'est très difficile d'agir. Donc moi je pense que la première étape passe par un meilleur système d'information sur les nouveau-nés en France.
De la part des pédiatres qui, pour des 25 ou des 26 semaines, ici ne réaniment pas parce que les parents demandent de ne pas réanimer et sont préoccupés qu'il n'y ait pas de séquelles, alors que je sais que dans d'autres pays, on réanime depuis 24-25 semaines et de fait, la mortalité est différente, mais peut-être pas le taux de handicap.
Oui, tout à fait. Alors ça, c'est un débat très intéressant qu'on n'aura pas le temps de l'avoir. La seule chose que je voudrais dire, c'est qu'on ne sait pas actuellement, c'est très difficile de faire ce calcul, de dire quel est le pourcentage de cet excès qui sera attribuable à ce phénomène qui existe. Donc, je suis d'accord que ça contribue. Et puis, c'est en train de changer en France actuellement. Donc, je ne sais pas comment ça va évoluer. Il faut pouvoir se donner des moyens pour le monitorer, pour le surveiller. Donc,
Paraît qu'on doit quitter la salle à 18h et que donc c'est indispensable de donner la parole à Sophie Blauwen-Raat de Rotterdam.
Yes, thank you for the introduction and thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I'm a third-year PhD student at the Generation R study group in Rotterdam in the Netherlands. And Generation R study is a birth cohort in which we follow pregnant women and subsequently their children from fetal life onwards. And the focus of the Generation R study is to identify early life factors, mainly in pregnancy, and early life environmental exposures that may cause bad health in children in later life. And today I will tell you something about the design of the study. I will tell you something of the hypothesis behind the study, and I will show you some results on one of the subjects we are focusing on within Generation R, namely on endocrine disrupting chemicals. First, I would like to introduce an hypothesis on which the Generation R study is based, the Barker hypothesis, or Barker. Barker is right? Yeah, okay. On the right side, you see Dr. Barker. He's a British epidemiologist, and in the 1990s, he proposed the hypothesis of the developmental origins of health and disease. And what he stated was that an adverse fetal or childhood environment during critical periods leads to permanent changes in organ structure or function and may have detrimental effects on health in later life. And what he actually meant was that adverse exposure in early life, and then mainly in the prenatal period, might have the biggest effect on health, as the human development takes mainly place in early life with the high cell division. And this makes the obstetrician a very important person in health, long life health. And this hypothesis also stated that in early life, children have the highest developmental plasticity, meaning that they are still able to adapt to conditions, to unfavorable conditions. And this may be helpful for the short term, but the adaptations of the organ may come at a price at compromised health potentials in later life. However, they will also be more likely to react to an intervention. Therefore, early intervention into potential unhealthy lifestyle or adverse environments might cause the biggest effect on health benefits, as an individual can still react to the intervention. When intervening at later ages, individuals may be already more developed, and therefore the health benefit might be less. And in line with this famous British economist, not sure if he's British, but a famous economist, he has calculated what the economic benefits would be for health intervention in children. And here you see a beautiful table. And on the horizontal axis, you see the periods in which you can intervene. So in prenatal period, in the preschool age, in the school age, or the post-school age. And on the vertical axis, you see the rate of return in investment in human capital. And what this means is how much economic benefit you get back from intervening compared to what it costs to intervene in someone's health. And you see that in the very early stages, the rate of return to investment in human capital is way higher. So the highest rate of return comes from investing as early as possible. In our study, we mainly aim to focus on the prenatal period because in this period, the embryonic and fetal period, the fastest development of humans in their whole lifetime takes place, as you all know, with a high turnover in the cell division. Also, all organs develop in this period, as you also can see in the figure. And this might cause a high vulnerability to the environmental exposures. And the aim of the Generation R study is to investigate the effect of adverse exposures in fetal life and early childhood and on health in later life. And this way we want to create the potential to intervene in those adverse environmental exposures. The Generation R study is an observational cohort study. We started including pregnant women in 2001, and we finished including them in 2006. And subsequently, we followed them until now. So the children are now around 20 years old. Women were asked to participate as soon as they got pregnant. And the participation was for free. But they got free ultrasounds and health measurements. So that's what the women came for. And we conducted it in Rotterdam in the Netherlands. So here you see the timeline of the study. First, we included women in pregnancy, and we saw them at 3 times in pregnancy. The women got fetal ultrasounds, but also we conducted interviews asking about environmental exposures or lifestyle behaviors. We performed measurements such as height, weight, and blood pressure, and also we drew specimens, for instance, urine and blood. And in the urine, for instance, we measured the endocrine disrupting chemicals I'm going to talk about later. Subsequently, we followed the children and also the mothers throughout their childhood as 0 to 4 years, 5 years, 9 years, to 13 years, and 17 years. And in all those periods, we measured lifestyle factors. We did measurements on anthropometrics. We did imaging with the MRI or the ultrasound or the DXA scan. And also we drew specimen to measure certain hormones and other measurements, lipids. Well, here we also see some potential environmental influential factors on which we focus in Generation R. Red factors have the highest influence on human health, and the yellow the smallest, but are still very influential. And today I want to dig deeper into exposure to endocrine disruptors as an example of what we're doing in Generation R in utero and the effect on child health development. And humans are mainly orally exposed to the endocrine disruptors, so therefore they can be classified in lifestyle and diet as well as environment. So endocrine disrupting chemicals recently got great attention. In 2012, this report of the WHO was published, expressing their concerns on the endocrine disrupting chemicals and asking for further research. And in this report, the effects of the endocrine disrupting chemicals on human health are summarized, but a lot is still unknown. And also in the news, the endocrine disruptors got great attention. One of the main main widely studied effects of the endocrine disruptors is on sperm count in adult men, potentially caused by the endocrine disruptors. And on the top, you see a very concerning headline about phthalates, which might cause cardiovascular diseases. We are also going to discuss phthalates today. And also on the right, you see that in the French news, the endocrine disruptors are also discussed. In Generation R, we focus on bisphenols and phthalates. Those are non-persistent endocrine disrupting chemicals, which means that they stay in the human blood for only 24 hours, but they may accumulate in organs. And they're used in a lot of everyday products, mainly plastic products, such as food can coatings, microwave materials, plastic bottles, child toys, and so on and so on. And their use has increased exponentially over the past decades, as the use of plastic has increased in the last century. And we are inevitably exposed to them. Within Generation R, all women had a certain amount of bisphenols or phthalates in their urine. And even more concerning, in pregnant women, they're able to pass the placenta barrier and get directly to the fetus. Although in many continents, such as the United States, there's more restriction on those endocrine disruptors, the European Union still allows the use of those. So that's also concerning. I will shortly go over the working mechanisms just to understand our hypothesis. Bisphenols and phthalates are able to bind to the estrogen receptor, having weak estrogenic effects. Also, they have shown, mainly in animal studies, to be able to bind to the androgen receptor, causing strong anti-androgenic activity. In the third row, you see they work at the level of the cell nucleus. They're able to bind to nuclear transcription factors, and those are mainly expressed in lipid tissue. And here they cause lipid accumulation and also disturb the lipid metabolism. And last, they're able to cause oxidative and nitrosative stress in the body, causing inflammation and insulin resistance. And you can imagine that also in pregnancy, this is not very favorable. Previous literature has shown associations of in animal studies and in adult studies of bisphenol and phthalate exposure with adverse outcomes, health outcomes. But studies on the effects of fetal exposure is still lacking. So therefore, one of our research questions was, what is the association of maternal exposure to bisphenols and phthalates in pregnancy with fetal and child health outcomes? And today I will discuss two maternal outcomes, gestational weight gains and hemodynamics. I will discuss fetal growth, and I will discuss child reproductive development to stay in the scope of this conference. We measured the bisphenols and phthalates at 3 time points in pregnancy in around first, second, and third trimester in a subsample of 1,400 women. So first onto maternal pregnancy health. I will first discuss this because this is highly influential for fetal health as well. Maternal gestational weight gain is associated with risks of adverse birth and childhood outcomes, both low weight gain and high weight gain. And disruption of hormones in pregnancy might cause changes in gestational weight gain. And therefore, the estrogenic effects of the bisphenols and phthalates might influence gestational weight gain. And also, the same accounts for the effects on the lipid metabolism I just explained. Okay, this is a very large table, but I will walk you through it. On the left, you see the periods of exposure, so early pregnancy or mid-pregnancy to the endocrine disrupting chemicals, and thereafter the endocrine disruptors. The first 3 are bisphenols, and the others are phthalates. And on the horizontal axis, you see the periods of gestational weight gain. We have on the left, early to mid-pregnancy weight gain, then mid to late pregnancy weight gain, and late to end pregnancy and total weight gain. And you can see that exposure to certain bisphenols and phthalates in pregnancy was associated with a lower gestational weight gain in all periods. Next, we wanted to look at maternal hemodynamics. The placenta is an organ with a balance of pro and anti-androgenic factors. And previous studies have already shown that endocrine disruptors are harmful for trophoblast cells. And this might cause a disbalance of those factors. And this might then subsequently cause hypertensive disorders in pregnancy. I think you're all familiar with those factors, but I will shortly go over them. Two very important factors also used in the clinics are the soluble FLT and the PIGF, the placental growth factor. And studies have already shown that a disbalance in those factors, so an increase in soluble FLT in the maternal blood and a decrease in the placental growth factor, is associated with preeclampsia. And this was exactly what we also saw in relation to higher exposure to early pregnancy, high molecular weight phthalate. We saw an increase in soluble FLT and also an increase in the soluble FLT PIGF ratio before 18 weeks. Onto the fetal development. As we saw an effect on gestational weight gain in utero, maternal gestational weight gain and maternal hemodynamics, we also want to look at fetal growth in utero. And we propose several working mechanisms in which the bisphenols and phthalates might influence fetal growth. First of all, by getting directly to the fetus, we propose they might influence the lipid metabolism, as I already explained. And secondly, we thought it might influence fetal growth by affecting the placenta, and this was in previous studies mainly seen in phthalates. We measured fetal growth at 13 weeks, 20 weeks, and 30 weeks, and also we measured birth antiprometics. And what we found was really in line with the effects on the maternal hemodynamics, namely that higher exposure to phthalates was associated with a lower weight, fetal weight across gestation, and those associations got stronger as pregnancy progressed. Whereas for the bisphenols, we saw the opposite effect. We saw that higher exposure to bisphenol S, which is one of the three main bisphenols we are exposed to in life, was associated with a larger fetus and a lower risk on small for gestational age born children. And mainly the exposure in first trimester had the highest effect. Next, to show more potential long-term effects of bisphenols and phthalates and to stay in line with the Barker hypothesis, I will show the results of the effect of fetal exposure to bisphenols and phthalates on child pubertal development. We hypothesized that fetal exposure to the estrogens and the anti-androgenic activity of the bisphenols and phthalates in pregnancy might disturb the development of the gonads and also of the endocrine axis, and therefore influence reproductive development throughout childhood. We measured ovarian and testicular volume of children at age 9 using the MRI, and also we measured pubertal development at age 13 using Tanner staging. First, I'll go to the results for boys. On the horizontal axis, you see the different phthalates and bisphenols. The first 5 are phthalates, and the last 3 are bisphenols. And what we saw on testicular volume was that higher exposure to certain phthalates and to bisphenol was associated with a larger testicular volume in boys at age 9. And in line with this, we also found that higher exposure to a certain phthalate in utero was associated with a faster genital development in puberty at age 13. And that a higher exposure to bisphenol A in pregnancy was associated with a faster pubic hair development at age 13 in puberty. And this effect on pubic hair development we also saw in girls. So in summary, in line with the hypothesis of developmental origins of health and disease, we looked at the effects of fetal exposure to bisphenols and phthalates in utero on maternal, fetal, and child health, and we saw several associations. We've also looked at various other outcomes, cardiovascular and neurocognitive, but it's too much to discuss today. But an important consideration is, I think, that endocrine disruptors might have large long-term health effects. And this might also have economic consequences. If we think back about the rate of return to investment, it might be smart to intervene on exposure to those endocrine disruptors. Also, we have to think about the ethics of use of those endocrine disruptors. In the European Union, mainly it's we're going to use a certain product, and then thereafter we're going to look at its health consequences. Except for medicines, that's actually the opposite. And I think that policy should be taken on a global level. The European Union might consider to get the same restrictions as, for instance, the USA. And for clinicians, I think it's good to be aware of the potential effects and inform patients on the potential effects. And I would propose to repeat our research in large multi-ethnic populations, because we are a population from Rotterdam, and of course Europe is really big. And in Generation R, we will further focus on the effect of environmental exposures, so not only the endocrine disruptors, but all other exposures, smoking, noise, green exposure, on morbidity and mortality in adulthood by following children until for a lifetime, and also to look at the effects over generations. And as we're also very interested in the effects on fertility and also the effects of parental health before pregnancy on child development, we started a new cohort in 2017, the Generation R Next cohort. And our next cohort is a cohort in which we included 4,000 couples that were willing to conceive, so not yet pregnant. We have included them between 2017 and 2021, so we have no results yet. Now, why did we do this? First of all, because we were very interested in really early life development. As you can see, the highest sensitivity to environmental exposures is in the very early stages of pregnancy. And also we hypothesized that already adverse environment and adverse lifestyle in parents before pregnancy have high impact, as the ripening of the egg cells takes place in this period, and also the production of sperm. And therefore in Generation R we include couples before conception, and this also enables us more to look at paternal influential factors. I would like to thank Vincent Jadot, who is the big brain behind the Generation R study, Leonardo Sandy, Rome Gaillard, Susanna Santos, Galana Sol, and Courante Kanan, and also all our co-authors within Generation R and the laboratories working with us, and of course the participating mothers and children. And I would like to thank you all for your attention.
Much. It was a bit frightening, yes.
Yeah, sorry.
Not the most positive paper, but okay. Any questions? What can we do? Just stop buying plastic? I mean, you know.
Well, I think on an individual level, you can try to avoid plastics by not buying microwave food, or you have certain doppers. Do you know them? Those are plastic bottles that do not contain any endocrine disruptors, and there are ways to avoid it. But actually, there should be like more global or like national restrictions on the plastics. So that's what we're trying to reach, but
In terms of recommendations during pregnancy, do you know of any, are there existing recommendations that can be made to pregnant women about avoiding, does that exist? Is there a set
well,
of?
there are not yet. There's no
Because-
guideline for
Right,
recommendations or
seems like that
websites.
could be possible, even though you say that there's no way of completely avoiding them. It seems like there could be ways of minimizing exposure for the fetus. Then why not turn this into action in
Yeah, I think
with
we can
obstetric
certainly consider this, yeah.
societies? We have to stop. Thank you so much for your
you.
presentations. Liz, also for coming all the way over here. Thanks.